Speaker is Michael Kolm, who's the Chief Transformation Officer for the City of Toronto, Canada.
All right. Thank you. It's really great to be here. So as mentioned, I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at the City of Toronto, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a second. But before I start, how many people here are from the GTA or from this area? Okay. How many people are not? Maybe that's good. Okay, so we have an excellent turnout. So I'm going to gear my conversation today a little bit about some of the challenges in Toronto and what we decided to do with the Smart Cities Challenge. But I want to make sure that you understand that this is about the challenges in all of our cities, right? And the challenges in all of our communities. So that's going to be a really important part of this presentation. How many people who live in the GTA think we live in a smart city today? Yeah, interesting, right? Interesting, right? And we had, I thought Mike Williams did a pretty good job articulating some of the smart things we're doing. I thought Rob and Councillor Holland did a pretty good job articulating some of the smart things we're doing. But what is this idea, this smart city idea that's where we're not quite convinced we're there yet, right? What is this idea that we're not quite convinced we're there yet? Because we are actually doing a lot, right? We are actually doing a lot. So let's talk about that today. What does it really mean to be a smart city? What does that really mean, okay? For me, one of the things it means is we need to create these kinds of headlines. If I get the slides up on the screen over here. We need to create these kinds of headlines. Becoming a smart city isn't about announcing how many sensors we've deployed, on Shepherd Avenue. It isn't about announcing that we've, put smart meters in our water system, so on. Those things are all very important, and they're going to enable much needed and necessary transformation here in Toronto, but it isn't really about that. It's about making life better for people who live here, right? Think about that. It's about making life better for people who live here. So these are the kinds of headlines that I'd like to try to create. And I'm going to talk a little bit about poverty and why we decided to attack that problem in terms of our Smart City Challenge proposal. But maybe just a second, what is the Chief Transformation Officer and what does it have to do with smart cities? So it's a question I get a lot. A smart city, is a city that's using connected data and technology. We've all heard the definitions, we're using data and technology to solve problems. It's also a city that's resilient. We had a question about that, and I couldn't agree more. It's a city that's using data and technology to become more resilient and deal with the effects of climate change. It's about a city that's efficient and effective. Right? It's a city that's delivering our services in a cost-effective way and in an efficient way that it's easy to deal with us. And it's about a city that's collaborative. We had another question about that. Are we interacting with the ecosystem, the private sector, other levels of government, other municipalities, public, not-for-profit sector, community groups, and residents in an effective way to deliver our services? Because as Councillor Holland mentioned a few minutes ago, if we're not going to solve all of these problems at City Hall, with all due respect to my colleagues down at City Hall, we're not going to solve all these problems at City Hall. We need help, and we need to collaborate if we're going to solve these problems. And then, of course, a smart city is also customer-focused, right? So we need to recognize that we ultimately serve our residents and we serve the people that live and work and play in the City of Toronto. So we need to make sure that we're providing those services in an effective and really customer-focused manner. So I won't reiterate all of that's been talked about in terms of the federal government challenge. Lisa talked about some of the criteria and what the objective of that overall program was. But I did want to say, what were the outcomes we were trying to drive by participating in the federal government challenge? We made a conscious decision to get involved. It was a big effort. I'm going to talk about that effort in a second. But what were we really trying to do? First thing was think differently about data and technology. As I say, we're already doing a lot. There's lots of transformation going on. We launched our, and check it out if you haven't seen it, we launched our new open data portal last week. Rob Meekel's done an excellent job on that. But it's really about thinking differently. It's about solutions focused on socioeconomic outcomes, right? So I just said, it's not about the sensors. Sensors are important. Sensors are going to enable outcomes. But what are the outcomes we're trying to drive? They're social and economic outcomes, so outcomes for people. And I would give the federal government Smart City Challenge team a huge amount of credit because I think they actually did start to change the the narrative and the dialogue here in Canada, at least, about what does it mean to become a smart city, because they really introduced inclusiveness and equity and some of the other sort of social factors into the conversation, which weren't in every conversation that I was involved in, at least, from a smart city perspective. It's about collaboration, it's about internal silos, and again, we got a question about that. How are we going to work with water, or how are we going to work with solid waste, or how are we going to work with transportation? And I would say that that's an important conversation at the City of Toronto, because I just, I didn't see any hands go up actually when I asked if you thought we're a smart city. We're doing lots of smart things within those silos, actually, right? Rob gave us some examples, and Mike gave some examples. What's going to be really important is that we work across those divisions and across those silos. So how are we collaborating with Toronto Hydro on energy grid, as an example? Because it's more than just an energy grid question. It's a resilience question, it's a customer service question, it's a question of affordability. There's a whole bunch of issues wrapped up in the kinds of decisions that happen at Toronto Hydro. So those decisions, and I'm not picking on them, but those decisions shouldn't just occur at Toronto Hydro, right? We want to inspire Torontonians to think big. We've been using the word wacky when we went out and met with stakeholders. So we wanted to really instigate a conversation about sort of strange and wacky ideas, and I think we did that, and I'll talk about some of those. And then we wanted to enable a longer-term planning cycle and a longer-term structure at the city. And how did we, can we use the federal government Smart Cities Challenge as a springboard to getting more organized, getting more long-term, and getting more strategic about it? So we did an extensive public consultation, and I won't go through all of the things that we did. We did surveys and we did online submission, of course. I think most of the cities did that. But the other thing we did was we went out and met a lot of groups. I mean, a lot of groups. And it was a big effort for a fairly small team to go out and do all of those. But we met with private sector, both at the top level and at mid sort of management level. We had panel discussions using our great library system, as Councillor Holland mentioned, that we simulcast to multiple libraries at the same time. We had many workshops with academics and with students at academic institutions. We had an Indigenous workshop. We had CEO roundtables. We had really, I think, a pretty extensive and pretty impressive sort of conversation with the community. And here's some of the community groups and some of the business groups and other groups that we leveraged to have that conversation. So what did we hear when we had that conversation, right? We heard some things that we expected to hear, right? If you live in Toronto, or if you live in the GTA, then you know that mobility is on people's minds. People would like to use data and technology in more innovative and more extensive ways to drive mobility outcomes. We did hear about affordable housing. We know that it's becoming more and more expensive to have a residence here in the City of Toronto and in the GTA overall. That's a big issue. We did hear about security, newcomer integration. But what was interesting, actually, through the surveys and through the public engagement process is yes, we did hear that, but where did we hear these things from? What pockets of the city and what areas in the city were we hearing different things from? And one of the things we realized was that no matter how great our public engagement process was, and we tried, believe me, we tried, and we had our surveys and so on, and we went and reached out, and we didn't just go to the library downtown. We simulcast it to libraries all over the city. But no matter where we went, we weren't actually hearing exactly the same things from different parts of the city. So we said, what's one part of the city where we aren't hearing from as much as we should? We have some data, and we can be really targeted in terms of a smart city strategy and a smart city approach. And through that whole discussion process, and again, we had hundreds of ideas. We had lots of interesting things. My favorite idea was that we should spend the $50 million on trying to figure out how to beat LeBron James in the NBA playoffs. But we decided that $50 million wouldn't be nearly enough money to do that. So we decided not to do that. But seriously, we had lots of really interesting and really good ideas, and we shortlisted those down into 6 directions. And the direction that was universally and overwhelmingly supported, not just by division heads, and leaders at City Hall, and it was, by the way, but not just by them. but by the community groups and people that we went and talked to about the shortlisted issues, right? And by the way, we had the big ones on the shortlist as well, right? We had mobility on the shortlist, we had civic participation on the shortlist, we had, build the digital twin on the shortlist. Those are all things we're going to go do, by the way, because we need to. We're going to go do all of those things. But in terms of the Smart Cities Challenge, what was the one thing we wanted to sort of raise the conversation, promote that this was something we should all be working together on, and then get going as fast as possible on it, and use the the federal government Smart Cities Challenge as a launching pad for getting going on it. And that was a digital strategy around tower communities or high-rise rental communities. And this was, as I say, universally supported by residents groups, public sector, private sector, people at City Hall, community groups, not-for-profits, and so on. This was the one issue where we said, geez, this is a big problem in Toronto.